Good morning, faithful listener. You are listening to the Bible Explained podcast, where the Bible gets explained. So grab your cup of coffee and stay tuned as we read through the book of Deuteronomy. Hello and good morning, friends and faithful listeners, and thank you for tuning into today's episode. And actually, my sister is here on the podcast with me today again, and she's going to help me out by talking about Deuteronomy chapter 9 with me. But before we begin all that, I'd like for her to let's see. James, tell something fun about yourself. What's going on in your life recently?
Well, helping out with P40, that's awesome. I'm loving that. And personally, just loving all of the festivities for Christmas, like open houses, church Christmas programs. I'm still homeschooling my daughter, and I'm just like seeing how long it takes for her to notice that the other kids aren't going to school, but she still has to, because she's homeschooled. And so we do easier work maybe, but we're still doing it. So
are you guys having a service on Christmas Day, since Sunday is Christmas Day?
We are. So the word that I keep hearing jump around everywhere is abbreviated. So I guess we're having an abbreviated service, whatever that is. So it won't be as long or whatever. And I think we're just going to do our whole worship band isn't going to participate, just Christmas carols and a message from the Bible and just getting together and celebrating. But we're not actually doing a Christmas Eve service. Our church is kind of small, but we're not doing Christmas Eve.
We're doing the opposite. We're doing a Christmas Eve and not a Christmas Day, but we're going to record the Christmas Eve special to put online for Christmas Day. That's what we're doing this year.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, but we are doing a New Year's Day service, so that'll be interesting.
Oh, are you? Okay. That's kind of fun. And
yeah.
Every church does something different. So I feel like even if you are visiting family or, I don't know, being a pastor's wife, I don't visit other churches very often. I mean, there's not an opportunity. But I do love that because we're all a part of the body of Christ. So I love visiting with other people. So this is actually a cool opportunity, possibly for people who get to go to family, hey, we're having a Christmas Eve service. You want to go and just go to worship with your family, or kind of something cool like that, even though we don't live close, but I would definitely go to your Christmas Eve service if I was going to be there.
Yeah. And yeah, that is a good point, James, because since Christmas Day kind of falls on not really a strange day, but it falls on a Sunday this year, other churches might be doing different things. So you might be able to find a church in your area that's actually doing a Christmas Day service. And maybe that might be a fun thing for you and your family to attend if you don't normally, or if your church is not doing a Sunday service this Christmas. Bunch of different options, I'm sure, in the area for different churches. But what's interesting about my sister and I is the fact that we are both in decently similar situations right now regarding our churches and the worship aspect of it specifically. So I always find that kind of interesting, that sometimes you and me, Jane, we line up very uniquely. We're like E.T. and Elliot.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And the funny thing is, being 9 years apart, and they say sisters aren't anything like each other, and we have very different personalities, I think, but our interests are very, very similar. And just it's really fun because then we can bounce things off of each other. And I don't know, I feel like I've learned a lot from you, even in worship and everything.
Yeah, and our interests and our talents are very similar too.
Yeah.
You just have a more, when it comes to creating content, you have a lot more gift for the details than I do, I think.
Oh, you're more detailed oriented? Okay. You're the broad picture.
I'm more of the, let's just get it done. I'll wing it. It's fine. Yeah. I used to, my boss years ago, because I used to be a hairdresser, everybody. And my boss would Like, she told me, she's like, I get heart palpitations watching you do your work. She's like, because you work so weird with everything you do. She's like, you don't work in like a linear fashion. You're just all over the place when you cut people's hair. I'm just like, yeah, I am. I don't follow any specific pattern or like any specific, like, I don't know. I can't explain that.
But it makes sense to you. You know where you are, even though she's thinking like you're supposed to go in the straight line. You're supposed to do A, B, C, D. And you're just like, well, I can do D, A, B, C, but I did them all.
Exactly. And like some haircuts, you definitely can't get away with that. And you have to follow like a very specific, whatever pattern. But for the most part, a lot of haircuts, you can kind of just go wherever you want.
Yeah, well, I've always been happy with the haircuts you give me. So I don't think there's any wrong problem with it. So just you do it that way. And that's how you see it. So.
And that's not the reason I stopped being a hairdresser, by the way, to anybody who had that assumption. I can do hair. I promise. It's just I don't like doing it is the main reason. Maybe we should talk about Deuteronomy.
Okay.
All right, let's go ahead and read Deuteronomy 9, verses 9 all the way to the end of the chapter, verse 29. So grab your coffee or your cup of tea and your Bible, obviously. I'll be reading out of the WEB version this morning, but feel free to grab the version you prefer to read out of, and let's go ahead and check this out together. Deuteronomy 9, verses 9 through 29. When I had gone up onto the mountain to receive the stone tablets, even the tablets of the covenant, which Yahweh made with you, then I stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water. Yahweh delivered me the 2 stone tablets written with God's finger. On them were all the words which Yahweh spoke with you on the mountain out of the middle of the fire in the day of the assembly. It came to pass at the end of 40 days and 40 nights that Yahweh gave me the 2 stone tablets, even the tablets of the covenant. Yahweh said to me, Arise, get down quickly from here, for your people whom you have brought out of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have quickly turned away from the way which I commanded them. They have made a molten image for themselves. Furthermore, Yahweh spoke to me, saying, I have seen these people, and behold, they are a stiff-necked people. Leave me alone, that I may destroy them, and blot out their name from under the sky. And I will make of you a nation mightier and greater than they. So I turned and came down from the mountain, and the mountain was burning with fire. The 2 tablets of the covenant were in my hands. I looked, and behold, you had sinned against Yahweh your God. You had made yourselves a molded calf. You had turned quickly away from the way which Yahweh had commanded you. I took hold of the 2 tablets, and I threw them out of my 2 hands and broke them before your eyes. I fell down before Yahweh as at the first, 40 days and 40 nights. I neither ate bread nor drank water, because of all of your sin which you sinned in doing that which was evil in Yahweh's sight, to provoke him to anger. For I was afraid of the anger and the hot displeasure with which Yahweh was angry against you to destroy you. But Yahweh listened to me that time also. Yahweh was angry enough with Aaron to destroy him, and I prayed for Aaron also at that same time. I took your sin, the calf which you had made, and burned it with fire and crushed it, grinding it very small until it was as fine as dust. I threw its dust onto the brook that descended out of the mountain. At Taberah, at Massa, and at Kibroth Hattava you provoked Yahweh to wrath. When Yahweh sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, Go up and possess the land which I have given you, you rebelled against the commandment of Yahweh your God, and you didn't believe him or listen to his voice. You have been rebellious against Yahweh from the day that I knew you. So I fell down before Yahweh, the 40 days and the 40 nights that I fell down, because Yahweh had said he would destroy you. I prayed to Yahweh and said, Lord Yahweh, don't destroy your people and your inheritance that you have redeemed through your greatness, that you have brought out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Don't look at the stubbornness of this people, nor at their wickedness, nor at their sin, lest the land you brought us out from say, because Yahweh was not able to bring them into the land which he promised to them, and because he hated them, he has brought them out to kill them in the wilderness. Yet they are your people and your inheritance, which you brought out by your great power and by your outstretched arm. What do you think, James, about all this? What's something that stands out to you?
There's so much going on in this part. It just so much. I don't even. I mean, I don't even know where to start, but I guess my first reaction was just like hopelessness. Like, what are these people thinking? Like, what, how could you do this? But then I think about myself and I'm like, well, who am I to judge? I can't judge. And then I see mercy and forgiveness and patience and just what a good leader Moses was, that God chose Moses because he was really faithful to the people, although he sees what they're doing and it's frustrating, but it's just amazing that he wants God to overlook their stubbornness, although he keeps mentioning it's again and again and again, but he wants God to overlook it. And for the part of he wants God to overlook this because of God's goodness and for the glory of God. And that's amazing.
Yeah, because he says at the very end here, he was concerned that Egypt would almost condemn God in a way by saying like, oh, God hated the Israelite people. So it was for the glory of God mainly that Moses wanted the people not to be destroyed by God, really. But one of the things you said earlier was that, who am I to judge? And we just talked about that the other day about basically that no one is righteous. And that's kind of the point that Moses is making here with all of this, is he's reminding the Israelites that they are really not righteous. And so when they go into the promised land that God's about to give them, it's not because of their own righteousness. It's basically because God is so good that he was overlooking all this like garbage that the Israelites had done for like 40 years. And what's really funny is Moses is basically like, from the minute I knew you, you were stubborn. That's what he says. Where does he say that? Oh yeah, verse 24. You have been rebellious against Yahweh from the day that I knew you.
That is pretty
that's funny.
To the point.
Yeah, it is to the point. It's very to the point. But starting back in verse 9, Moses talks about all this account that happened way back in the book of Exodus that we've talked about before. But God had spoken the 10 commandments directly down to the people. Like literally with his own voice, he stated the 10 commandments. But the people didn't want to hear God's voice. They were too scared to hear God's awesomeness, basically. So they asked Moses to do it for them. And that's when Moses went up onto the mountain. I think it was Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai. I can't remember which one. Horeb?
Oh, I was going to say verse 8, at Horeb you aroused the Lord's wrath.
Oh.
So.
Thank you. Yes, it was Mount Horeb. Thanks for mentioning that to me. If I would have just read a verse sooner, I would have remembered what mountain it was. Okay, so yeah, it says...
Hold on a second.
Go ahead.
Can you hold on? Because I just want to make sure. What was Sinai?
So sorry, guys. We just paused the podcast for a few minutes because we just found out, and maybe I've talked about this before. I don't remember if I did or not. But we found out that Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai are likely the same place, potentially. I don't know, 2 different names for the same mountain. Or they say that there could have been like 2 mountain peaks and one was Horeb and one was Sinai. People aren't really sure. We just found out.
A little bit of a debate there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good to know.
Good to know. Just to let you guys know. Moses here says that it was Mount Horeb. He says he went up onto the mountain to receive the stone tablets, even the tablets of the covenant which Yahweh made with you. He stayed on the mountain for 40 days and for 40 nights and didn't eat anything. And if you guys remember me talking about all that, I talked about how it was basically a supernatural event that Moses experienced. And anytime that Moses did go up on the mountain, he experienced pretty much a supernatural occurrence, whether it was seeing God's glory or like his face shining bright when he came back down the mountain, or God just sustaining him for a extended period of time, like when he was, eating no bread or water.
Or bringing back tablets that were inscribed by the actual finger of God.
Right. Yeah, so this mountain was kind of where God's like glory was dwelling at this time period. So something supernatural always happened basically on this mountain because it was God. So it says that at the end of 40 days and 40 nights, God made the 10 commandments inscribed on 2 stone tablets, written with God's finger. And so he gives Moses the tablets, and he says at the same time, he's like, get down from here, for your people whom you brought out of Egypt have corrupted themselves. So he gives Moses the tablets, and he's like, all right, go deal with these people, basically. It says, they have turned quickly away from the way which I commanded them, and they have made a molten image for themselves. And what's shocking about all this was just 40 days prior to this, God had spoken to the people, like directly. And not only this, like God's presence was there. I mean, in the pillar of fire, in the pillar of cloud, and just the burning of the mountain in general, with God's presence like being there. This was like a crazy thing for these Israelite people to have done. So then in verse 13, it says, Yahweh spoke to me saying, I've seen these people, and behold, they are stiff-necked people. So what's that term mean, stiff-necked?
I would say absolutely stubborn.
I remember one time I was riding a horse. It was a really mean horse. It was not a nice horse. And if anything had a stiff neck, it was that horse, which I think is literally what the term means, is like an animal that refuses to listen to the rider. And I'll never forget this horse. It was just going wherever it wanted to go. And it was like bumping my legs into trees and stuff. And it was painful. I was like, get me off of this horse. But that's basically what the term means.
I never heard about that before.
Oh, yeah, that was it. I went to like a woman's retreat like last year, and that happened then.
Oh, yeah. I've got some little adjectives here that are similar. So I think this is interesting. Stubborn, obstinate, mulish, pig-headed. So, I mean, pig-headed.
Yeah. So it's a strong word for sure, stiff-necked. So God basically calls the Israelite people a stiff-necked nation. And so he says basically, leave me alone, Moses, because I'm going to destroy these people, and then I'll make you this wonderful nation, because that would still be fulfilling the promise God made to the ancestors, I suppose, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But obviously Moses didn't want that, but he goes down the mountain.
Wait, this is one of my favorite parts about it. He goes down the mountain in verse 15, and it says, while it was ablaze with fire. Like, I can't imagine what the mindset is here of the people. Like, you see this mountain right near you, it's ablaze with fire, and they're just over here making a molten calf, like that wasn't anything.
Maybe they were just like chalking it up to like a forest fire or something. Who knows? People like to explain things away.
Well, yeah, explaining it away, or like, yeah, this is going on, so we're making, this God that is making this happen, and they were so used to that from coming out of Egypt that every God, our God is an invisible God, and they just didn't think that was good enough. It was like, well, he's invisible, so we're going to make his likeness, which was completely and totally wrong, which they would find out in the tablets that Moses would have to rewrite.
Right. So it says Moses went down the mountain with the 2 tablets. The mountain was on fire because of God's glory. And he was so angry with the people when he saw the calf and all the dancing and the corruption and whatever else was going on during all this. And he threw the tablets out of his hands. So that response, I've heard people say it's either a good response or a bad response. I've heard people say that it was Moses expressing his anger in a very unhealthy way by destroying something God made. Or I've heard people say like Moses was showing how the 10 Commandments have been totally, destroyed by the people. What do you think about that?
I could see that, but it doesn't ever say that I know of in the Bible that it says that Moses was in the wrong for doing it. So it wasn't like you broke the commandments. Like the one time when he, struck the rock instead of speaking to it, it was like that was wrong. But this wasn't like the time that you broke the 10 commandments that God wrote with his own finger. Like that wasn't one of his, mentioned as a bad thing. So maybe he had just felt that it was such a sin that, he felt that it had been destroyed, like you said.
Mm-hmm. I'm on the other side of that, where I kind of think it was wrong, because God did tell Moses after that he had to rewrite them. So I think maybe that was maybe that was a punishment in and of itself. Moses was so angry that maybe he just threw something, and that was what was in his hands. I mean, maybe there's multiple things going on with Moses, but he did have to end up rewriting them himself. God did not rewrite them for Moses.
I just think to myself, like, this part of the Bible has always like stood out to me and like troubled me. Like, I can't believe there was something that, people had in their hands that was like written by the finger of God, like actual writing, and like it existed for 10 minutes before, I got down in the hands of the people before it was destroyed. I don't know.
But that's what we do as human beings. We just like mess things up that God makes.
Yeah. And then he has mercy again and again. And I think that's what we think about this. It's like, oh, we destroyed that. Well, God is again fixing it, having mercy again.
Yeah. So Moses threw the tablets. He saw the corruption of the people at this point with the golden calf. And it says that he was afraid of the anger and the hot displeasure with which Yahweh was angry against you to destroy you. So after all this happened, and if you read the account in Exodus chapter 32, you'll see that Moses took care of the problem very quickly. Like, he destroyed that calf basically the second he saw it. He like molted it down and like ground
it and ground it into powder.
Yeah. And then he threw the powder into the water for the people to drink. I talked about this last time, which is kind of funny. When you drink something, your body goes through a natural process to remove that from your body. So this golden calf literally became crap.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I find that very entertaining myself. Whether or not that was what Moses was doing, I don't know. He might have. I wouldn't put it past Moses to do that, just with how snarky he is. Do you have anything to say about that?
About the poop? Yeah. No, I think that's logical. I've even seen archaeological things where, like, recently I saw something about some false idols becoming like urinals, possibly during one of the reigns and the kings when they were trying to do away with stuff. But I can't remember the exact like time frame of that, but I just heard that. So, I mean, that's basically all that they are good for. It's,
mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think it's fun. It's a humorous way to deal with it. So, I mean, we can imagine that maybe that could be part of Moses's thought process.
And after he did all that, it says that he basically told the people, he's like, you guys messed up. And he's like, I got to go back up on the mountain to talk to God now because of what you have just done. So it says now, and Jamie pointed this out to me, which was interesting because I never caught this. It says that Moses went up back on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights again, praying for the people, and didn't eat anything again. So this means that potentially Moses was up on that mountain for 80 days without any food or water.
Was he even thinking about food? And, you think about the amazing supernatural power that's happening here. And it's like, you'd be so hungry after 40 days, but then it's almost probably a relief, like, oh, I just want to be in the presence of God again because look what has happened. And he knew that God was going to take care of him. So, but I'm sure that was very devastating emotionally also, that they could have been destroyed and they were doing that again. So.
Right. And he was actually,
I can't imagine.
It says he was afraid of Yahweh at this point. I was afraid of the anger of Yahweh. But it says that Yahweh listened to me in verse 19. I mean, Moses has prayed for the people by this point in time with the golden calf several times because they were always messing up, basically. And we find out later that if you go on reading that, the people messed up multiple times after this, to once again, God having a very similar reaction to this time with golden calf years later. Well, maybe not years. Yeah, it would have been years. A couple years later, he had a very similar reaction with the people when they rebelled again. And he said, I'm going to destroy these guys. And Moses, I'm going to make you out of this nation, basically. I'm going to make your descendants very, the new Israelite nation, basically. Moses, once again, fell down and begged God not to do it. And it was for God's glory, which is what you mentioned at the beginning, James.
Yeah, and you think about the frustration Moses might have had, and he wasn't self-seeking, like, you know what, God? Yeah, let's do. And it was just such a good leadership there, that he showed that, and, he knew of God's mercy. He knew that God had mercy like this. And I think this shows Moses's desire to seek God's glory and not his own.
And that's a theme we see with Moses a lot of times, is he was really God-centered in a lot of cases. Like, he wasn't perfect by all means. He was a man, but he definitely had a desire for God, unlike a lot of people. Because we see leaders later on that really don't have a good desire for God. Maybe they like God a little bit, but they weren't like Moses. Like, Moses was kind of in a league of his own when it came to desiring God's glory and presence. I don't know. How can we as people become more like Moses with that? Because it's definitely something to emulate, desiring God and desiring God's glory.
Well, patience. And, when you deal with somebody who's in sin that you recognize, that this person is living in a life of sin, especially if it's somebody who claims that they love God, to pray for them, there could be some anger there because sin affects and hurts a lot of people around, it just doesn't hurt the person. It hurts everyone involved, people that, are innocent. And so that anger that sometimes you can feel, just giving that to God in prayer, and also being able to tell people the truth about it and telling them, hey, I see this in your life. This is what the Bible says, and I love you, and not trying to self-seek, like, oh, I told you that was going to happen in your life, but truly approaching people in a loving way, not lying about it, not accepting sin, but truly praying for them, telling them the truth, and then taking it to God. Yes. For God's glory.
Yeah, and there's a verse actually that mentions that Moses was the most humble man on the planet. And I talked to Jamie about, what I believe that personally means, because if you go back to the Hebrew, it may not mean the humble that we think of nowadays. It could have meant more like deeply depressed, but which I could definitely see Moses being probably one of the most depressed people in the Israelite nation. But as far as it goes, though, Moses is extremely humble in the way that we think of humbleness nowadays anyway, because of the fact that he didn't want glory for himself when it came to God, saying that he was going to make Moses a great nation. And I think that's another aspect of emulating Moses's need and want and desire for God's glory, is that he was a humble person in the fact that he really just wanted God. Like, he just wanted God completely.
Less of me, God, more of you, just God centered. It's not about me. I'm here, I'm available to be used, but also if you use somebody else, use them, because it's all about you. It's not about me. And
even at the end, when he was unable to go into the promised land, he did train up Joshua and did encourage Joshua to take on his role, even though Moses was extremely disappointed that he wasn't able to lead the Israelites into the promised land. He still did what God told him to do, and he did encourage Joshua to take over the role, even though I can imagine he might have been fighting with some jealousy at some point in time over that he was not allowed at all to enter into the promised land. which was something he deeply desired also. Yeah, we've been talking a lot about humbleness the past few days. It seems like it's a theme, almost, in this portion of Deuteronomy, because first we talked about humbleness regarding one's own achievements, and then on, when was it, Friday, we also talked about humbleness regarding one's like spiritual, not being self-righteous, basically. You know, if we're supposed to emulate desiring God and desiring God's glory, we need to be humble in a way that Moses was, where we're okay with other people taking the lead. We're okay with, I don't know. How else would you describe that, James?
I think that is exactly what it is. Somebody else taking the lead, or just, supporting someone else. You see that God is using them, and it's not just, well, he didn't use me. Well, he did, but, but that's not the concern. It's, the concern is God is merciful in all of our lives, but he chooses to use different people in different ways. And don't compare yourselves with others, just be close to God and trust him instead of having jealousy.
There's a verse that says, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up in due time. So even though like right now you might not have gotten that promotion you wanted, or you might be in a position where you're just like, why am I stuck here? Or maybe you're like feeling, I could do this job so much better than this other person who has it. And maybe you're right. Maybe you could really do that job better, but God didn't put you in that position to do that job. So yeah, I think what Jamie said makes a lot of sense. Like, it's okay to let those other people take the lead without becoming jealous. Like, work on your own amount of like jealousy and comparison. Because if you do that and you do humble yourself and say, you know what, God, I'm going to let you work in this other person's life. It says God will lift you up in due time. But I mean, of course, that's not the complete motivation we're supposed to have for that. Once again, it is for God's glory, everything. One of the people that goes to my church, his name is JJ. And I actually recently drew some pictures for his book he published last year. And I talked about it on the podcast a few days ago. It's called Encounters with John. But something JJ said really stood out to me. He said it directly to me. He told me that he was praying for me to start worshiping God in the way that God asks of me to worship him in, instead of the way that I think I should. And like,
wow.
I was kind of like, thanks, I think. But it stood out to me so much. Like, that's a very specific prayer. And like, JJ's absolutely right. And I've seen it more recently. I want to worship God the way I want to worship God. I'm just like, I want to do this. I want to do that. I'm not letting God work in my life, or rather, I'm trying to block God sometimes from working in my life the way I don't want him to work in my life. Like, he's calling me to something different than I want. And like right now, I'm finding myself in a huge waiting period with so many things. I'm just like, oh my gosh, like, why am I still waiting? I just feel like my entire life is waiting. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to some of that, James, with a lot of things.
I think a lot of people can resonate with that. Yep.
Yeah, but I think that's a good theme even, is try to worship God in the way he calls you to worship him.
Yeah. And what did he give you? Like, there's so much that we can compare ourselves with. Different families, and oh man, it would be so much fun to be in their family. Well, God had different plans, or, and we look around and we see different things, and it's just human nature, but we really have to fight that and accept what God is trying to do in our lives. Exactly. And worship him the way that he wants us to, in the circumstance that we are in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Jamie, for coming up on the podcast. I am sorry that this podcast is like over a half an hour long. We're doing this episode over Zoom right now, my sister and I. And we had to stop the Zoom recording once to restart it because Zoom kicks you off after 40 minutes.
Okay, we have been on Zoom talking about things. I think this is our 5th Zoom meeting, is it? And
yes,
today we started the podcast, like 3 times. We couldn't, and then we started laughing and we just couldn't get it together.
Yeah, it's been tough over here. All right, Jane, well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast again. Thank you for this, and hopefully you can come back on again soon sometimes. It's always a fun episode with you because we just laugh a lot. It's a side I think that the listeners don't often hear of me, and this really is genuine. My sister and I are like best friends, basically, so. Yeah, we talk to each other all the time. Anyway, guys, I hope that you tune in to the Christmas Eve special that's coming up on Saturday. And once again, that's going to be airing Christmas Eve at midnight, actually, so basically Christmas morning. And I do that every single year, and this year I'm going to be talking about the Trinity. And I've done my research for it, and it's been really cool so far to learn so much about the Trinity based upon biblical verses and things. So I hope you guys tune into that, and also just have a really Merry Christmas, happy listening, and God bless.